بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
That Iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. And statements are not of any benefit without actions. And actions and statements are not of any benefit without intention. And statements and actions and intention are not of any benefit without them being upon the Sunnah.
وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So last week then we started the section regarding Iman, and we mentioned the three principles or three main foundations of Ahlus Sunnah regarding Iman. The first foundation was that statements and actions are from Iman. The second foundation was that Iman increases and decreases. And the third foundation was that people have different levels of Iman. And we mentioned the evidences for all three of those. Today then, just to begin with, we're briefly going to mention some of the people of innovation who opposed Ahlus Sunnah in their understanding of Iman. The first of those are, of course, the Murji'ah. The Murji'ah. And this group known as the Murji'ah, that word Murji'ah in Arabic comes from the family tree that means to delay something, to push something back, to keep something back. That is where it comes from. And that is because the Murji'ah, what do they keep back from Iman? They keep actions out of Iman. The Murji'ah, they keep actions out of Iman. They say that actions are not from Iman. So that delay or that holding back the actions, that is where their name Murji'ah comes from, or that's one of the meanings of it. The Murji'ah is like an umbrella term. There are multiple groups that come under the banner of the Murji'ah. One of them is the Jahmiyyah, and they are extreme Murji'ah. The Jahmiyyah, they are extreme Murji'ah. Al-Jahmiyyah وهم غلاة المرجئة وَالْإِيمَانُ عِنْدَهُمْ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. Because according to the Jahmiyyah, Iman, the definition of Iman is ma'rifah, knowing, just knowing, recognizing, a recognition. That is all Iman is. So they say basically, if you know Allah and you have a recognition of Allah, that means you're a mu'min. You know Allah, you understand, you have a recognition of Allah, you're a mu'min. That is all it takes according to them. And that is, of course, completely false. That is, of course, completely false. Because if the definition of Iman was simply having a recognition of Allah, a knowing of Allah, then even who would be a mu'min? More than the pagans. More than the which non-believers? Iblis himself. Iblis would be a mu'min according to that definition. Does Iblis not know Allah? Of course. And there were conversations where Iblis asks Allah and speaks to Allah. Iblis knows and recognizes Allah. So according to the definition of the Jahmiyyah, even Iblis would be a mu'min. He has the ma'rifah of Allah, that recognition and knowing of Allah. So we can see this definition is completely false. And then it follows on from there. Even people like Pharaoh at the time of Musa alayhi salam would be a mu'min. Then he in his heart recognized Allah and knew Allah. So this definition is obviously completely false. The Jahmiyyah are extreme murji'ah when it comes to the definition of Iman. Then the second most extreme are the Karramiyah. Al-Karramiyah. And they are the followers of Muhammad ibn Karram. They believe that Iman is statement of the tongue. That Iman is statement of the tongue. عند الكرامية الإيمان هو قول اللسان فمن أتى بالشهادتين فهو مؤمن عندهم. So whoever says the shahada, whoever says it, they are a mu'min now. It is simply the utterance upon the tongue that is Iman according to them. But then the obvious problem and issue in that is therefore, what about in your heart? If a person says the shahada upon his tongue but doesn't believe it in his heart, according to them and their definition, he is still a mu'min. According to their definition and understanding, he is still a mu'min. وَلَكِنَّهُمْ, but they do give a kind of specification. According to them, a person who utters the shahada upon his tongue, then that is sufficient. He is a mu'min even if he doesn't believe it in his heart. But they say that he is a mu'min in this world. We judge him upon his statement. He's a mu'min in this world, but he will not be a mu'min in the afterlife. He will be in the hellfire forever. But this statement of theirs is once again falsehood. قولهم هذا في غاية البطلان لأنه يلزم عليه أنه يجوز أن يطلق على المنافقين إنهم مؤمنون. According to them, it would therefore be permissible for us to call the hypocrites, the munafiqun, we would be allowed to call them mu'minun, believers. According to them, in this world, the ruling upon the one who says the shahada, even if they don't believe it in their hearts, is mu'min. So the munafiqun, they are mu'minun. We would be able to call them mu'minun in this world. And obviously we do not, that is false. They are munafiqun. And that is proven by the Qur'an. Allah said in the Qur'an, إِذَا جَاءَكَ الْمُنَافِقُونَ قَالُوا نَشْهَدُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ. That when the hypocrites, they come to you and they testify that indeed you are the messenger of Allah, Wallahu ya'lamu innaka la rasuluh, and Allah knows that indeed you are His messenger. But then what does Allah say? Wallahu yashhadu innal munafiqina lakathibun. Allah testifies that the hypocrites are liars. So their statement upon the tongue does not make them mu'min in this world. They are liars, Allah says. They are munafiqun, disbelievers. Their statement upon the tongue does not give them the ruling that they are mu'min now. So the Karramiyya are incorrect in this claim of theirs. If they say it, then they are mu'min. They are not. The munafiqun are not mu'minun. فَهُمْ كَاذِبُونَ فِي الْإِيمَانِ. So they were lying that they were upon Iman, those hypocrites. ويكفي في بطلان هذا المذهب أن يكون من يسمى مؤمنا مخلدا في النار. Also then, according to them, a person who utters the shahada is a mu'min in this world. He's a mu'min. We're not saying he's a munafiq, but we have to call him a mu'min judging upon the apparent. It's not like that. They say he is a mu'min. But that means the mu'minun of this world, according to their own opinion, in the afterlife, if they didn't believe it in their hearts, are disbelievers and therefore will end up in the fire forever. That therefore means actual mu'minun, as we are supposed to declare them as, actual mu'minun are going to end up in the hellfire forever. And that is again a completely incorrect principle. No actual mu'min will ever stay in the hellfire forever. So they've made a mistake in the way that they have explained Iman. This sect, the Karramiyya, and this kind of speech of theirs regarding Iman isn't a major issue anymore, because this particular sect disappeared, finished. They no longer really exist. And their ideology on Iman as such does not really exist. So they kind of finished off and disappeared and no longer exist. The third group, when it comes to Iman, the Murji'atul Fuqaha. The Murji'atul Fuqaha, they are called. The Murji'a of the Fuqaha. وهو الذي قال به الإمام أبو حنيفة. And this is the position that Al-Imam Abu Hanifa was upon. It is narrated that he repented from this position, but some of the scholars say that isn't established, that he was actually upon this position, the Murji'atul Fuqaha, where they basically say that Iman is belief in the heart, statement of the tongue, but they don't directly include actions. They say it is belief in the heart, statement of the tongue, but they don't directly include actions. That is what is mentioned that Al-Imam Abu Hanifa was upon, and there are narrations that maybe he came back from that position, but they are known as the Murji'atul Fuqaha. The fourth group are the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya. The Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya. They believe that Iman is belief in the heart only, which makes them the same as which ones? Karramiyya said it's upon the tongue. The Jahmiyya, the first ones, the ones who said it's about recognition and understanding. As long as you have that knowledge in your heart, you're a believer. Asha'ira Maturidiyya, upon the basis of their opinion, also said the same, that Iman is in the heart. But they did add something on top, which makes them different to the Jahmiyyah. They said, أن الشهادتين شرط في إجراء أحكام الإسلام وعليه فمن أتى بالتصديق ولم يقر بلسانه فإنه في أحكام الدنيا كافر ولكنه عند الله مؤمن ناج. You'll see how ridiculous these positions are now. They said it is belief in the heart. However, they said in this world, can we see people's intentions? We cannot. So the only way we can judge a person to be a believer is if they add on the statement of the tongue and say the shahada. If they don't, then how can we judge their intention? We don't know. So you got to understand this carefully. They are saying Iman is just belief in the heart. If you've got the belief in the heart, you are a mu'min. But in this world, for people to know that, you've just got to say the shahada. What if somebody doesn't say the shahada but has the Iman in his heart? What's their ruling upon him? But they don't know. That was their whole point. If you don't say it, we don't know if you're a believer. So according to them, if you have Iman in your heart, but you don't say the shahada, then in this world, you are treated as a kafir. If you're not going to say the shahada, we don't know then. So you're a kafir. But you had Iman. We just don't know because you're not saying it on the tongue. So we have to declare you a kafir. But you do have Iman. So on the day of judgment, you are going to be judged as a believer. Because you have Iman. This is the complication of it. They say a person who has Iman in his heart is a believer. But in this world, for us to know that, you have to say the shahada. If you say the shahada, then we treat you as a believer. If you don't say the shahada, okay, you might have Iman in your heart, but we don't know that if you don't say the shahada, so we have to treat you as a kafir. But on the day of judgment, Allah obviously knows if you had Iman in your heart, and if you did, then on the day of judgment, you will be treated as a believer. You had that Iman in your heart. I think everybody's still confusing it. If a person, now you have this individual A, this person A, he has Iman in his heart. Person B is the Ash'ari Maturidi. He's talking to person A. Person A has never said the Shahada and refuses to utter the Shahada. According to the Ash'ari and Maturidi, this person A is a kafir. He won't say the Shahada. He hasn't uttered the Shahada. He's a kafir then. Because the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyah, they say, we don't know unless you say the Shahada. But person A has Iman. Person A knows, I'm a believer, I have Iman. In this world, the Asha'ira and the Maturidis are going to treat him as a disbeliever though, because he's not saying the Shahada. But on the day of judgment, the Asha'ira and the Maturidis say that if he really did have Iman in his heart, on the day of judgment, Allah obviously knows that, and so they will be treated as a believer for having that Iman in their hearts, and so they will be in paradise, which again brings you this complete contradiction. In this world, they are dealt with and treated and declared a kafir, but on the day of judgment, they are a complete believer who ends up in paradise. All of this complete nonsense, the way they understand Iman. So, in the basis of it, the Asha'ira and the Maturidi are the same as the Jahmiyyah, that Iman is belief in the heart. But in the application of it, they say in this world, you need to say the Shahada for us to know that you're a believer. If you do the Shahada, then we know you're a believer and we treat you as a believer. If you don't say the Shahada, then we don't know, so we have to treat you as a kafir. If you did have Iman, then on the Day of Judgment, Allah will know that and you'll be a believer in the afterlife and dealt with as a believer in the afterlife. But in this world, we don't know if you don't say the Shahada, so we have to treat you as a kafir. So then, according to them, there could be people who are kuffar in our eyes in this world. They are kuffar, but on the Day of Judgment, they are going to be in paradise. So all of these complete contradictions, the way that they have understood Iman. That is the basic outline of the four major sects when it comes to the opposition of Ahlul Sunnah in Iman. All of those are under the umbrella term of being Murji'ah. Now then, coming to the explanation of Shaykh al-Bukhari. Everything we did there was kind of an introduction, which will cover most of what's in the explanation as well. Shaykh al-Bukhari says, or reading the text from Al-Humaydi first, Al-Imam Al-Humaydi said, وَأَنَّ الْإِيمَانَ قَوْلٌ وَعَمَلٌ يَزِيدُ وَيَنْقُصُ وَلَا يَنْفَعُ قول إلا بعمل ولا عمل وقول إلا بنية ولا قول وعمل ونية إلا بسنة. That Iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. And statements are not of any benefit without actions. And actions and statements are not of any benefit without intention. And statements and actions and intention are not of any benefit without them being upon the Sunnah. That was the statement of Al-Imam Al-Humaydi. Shaykh Al-Bukhari Hafidhahullah Ta'ala then says, هذا المبحث بدأه رحمه الله تعالى بقوله أن الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد وينقص. That the author, Al-Imam Al-Humaydi, started this section by telling us that Iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. And this is all connected to the previous part where Al-Imam Al-Humaydi had said, أن يؤمن الرجل, that the believer or the man must believe in, and he had talked about the qadr, the decree, and now he's continuing with that line of thought, and that the man must also believe in all of this, the Iman section. Then Shaykh al-Bukhari says there are a few points to take note of when it comes to the issue of Iman. Point number one, إن من أصول اعتقاد أهل السنة والجماعة أن الإيمان قول وعمل واعتقاد يزيد بالطاعة وينقص بالمعصية. That the principles of Ahlul Sunnah, from the principles of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'a, is that Iman is statements and actions and belief. It increases with obedience and it decreases with disobedience. And that is something that there is a consensus of the Ummah upon. Again, I don't want to digress too much, but we'll add this section in, where Shaykh al-Bukhari has just mentioned that it increases with obedience and decreases with disobedience. There's something you can understand here with the issue of how Iman decreases. This is, you can think of this like a chart. You can even put it in your notes like a chart. Title is How Iman Decreases. There are two main ways, two arrows coming off that title of how Iman decreases. One is by doing sins, disobedience, by doing sins, There's another way though that Iman can decrease. What's the other way? The second arrow. Not much action of obedience. You're right, that's it. The second one is tarku ta'a. If you stop doing your obedience or you decrease your level of obedience. So you might not necessarily be doing any sin. We're not talking about that you've left an obligation as such. Maybe you've just left lots of sunnah actions, lots of other good deeds generally. And as a consequence of you leaving lots of these good deeds, then your Iman may decrease. So Iman decreases by committing sins or by leaving acts of obedience. Then, committing sins is obvious. That side, nothing else to add on. You commit sins, your Iman decreases. But this side now where you leave acts of obedience. Now from there, two more arrows come out. Two more arrows come out from there. When you leave an act of obedience, it could be something that you are blameworthy upon for leaving, or it could be something that you are not blameworthy upon necessarily. The one where you are blameworthy upon leaving that action is obviously where you've left an action that is obligatory to do. If you leave an action that is obligatory to do, by leaving those actions you are blameworthy, sinful. It's a blameworthy thing for you to leave those actions, and by leaving them it's going to decrease your Iman. But sometimes the other arrow coming out there, you could leave certain actions, but you're not blameworthy for leaving them. You're not blameworthy for leaving them. And that is where you are leaving off sunnah actions, mustahab actions. They are sunnah, mustahab things. If you don't do them, you're not committing a sin. You're not committing a sin by not doing them. They are only sunnah actions, mustahab actions. So you're not blameworthy for leaving them. You're not sinning by leaving them. But by leaving them all, not doing any of the sunnahs, any of the mustahab things, you've decreased the amount of worship you're doing, and that could therefore impact on your level of Iman. What about another way where you're not blameworthy? It could be when you leave an obligation, but it's because you have a reason, like a woman in her period. Cannot pray, cannot fast. She has a reason to leave that obligation, but it's still going to affect her Iman. So just to clarify the chart, the decrease of Iman, how Iman decreases, that's your title at the top. Two arrows come out of there. One is by committing sins, finished. Your Iman decreases when you commit sins. The other one, when you leave actions of worship. From that one now, two arrows came out. When you leave an action of worship, you could either be blameworthy or you could be not blameworthy. Where you are blameworthy, there's just one thing to put in the notes there. That's when you leave obligations, wajib actions. When you're not blameworthy, two arrows are there. When you're not blameworthy, two arrows are there. One is when you leave sunnah actions, mustahab actions, you're not blameworthy for that. And the other one is where you leave obligations, but you have a reason. Like a woman leaves the prayer, leaves the fasting, but she has a reason when it's her period. But that still doesn't mean it won't affect your Iman. She doesn't pray, she doesn't fast, even with a legitimate reason, so she's not sinning, but it will still decrease her Iman in those days. Her iman may decrease during her monthly cycle days because she's not praying, she's not fasting, she may not be doing the Qur'an. So that's going to affect her iman. That's the meaning of the narration. نَاقِصَاتُ عَقْلٍ وَدِينٍ. When the Messenger said the women are deficient in their intellect and religion, this is the meaning of being deficient in the religion. That they can't pray, they can't fast during that time. So that's your chart. Hopefully everybody's got that chart accurately. So as Shaykh al-Bukhari was saying here, that it is from the principles of Ahl-Sunnah that iman increases and decreases. Increases with obedience, decreases with disobedience. وحكى الإجماع غير واحد من الأئمة. And there are multiple scholars who have mentioned that there is a consensus on that fact. That iman is statements, actions, belief, increases with obedience, decreases with disobedience. There is a consensus upon that which multiple scholars have quoted. From among them, Ibn Abd al-Barr, one of the famous scholars of the past, in his famous book At-Tamheed, he said, أجمع أهل الفقه والحديث على أن الإيمان قول وعمل ولا عمل إلا بنية والإيمان عندهم يزيد بالطاعة وينقص بالمعصية. Al-Imam Ibn Abd al-Barr, in his book At-Tamheed, he said that the scholars of fiqh, and hadith, the scholars of fiqh and hadith, they are agreed, they have a consensus upon the fact that iman is statements and actions, and there is no action without intention. And iman, according to them, increases with obedience, decreases with sinning. Al-Imam Al-Bukhari said, and we mentioned this one earlier on, Al-Imam Al-Bukhari said, لم أكتب إلا عمن قال الإيمان قول وعمل. Al-Imam Al-Bukhari said, I never took knowledge from anyone except that they were upon this statement, iman is statements and actions. He said, I never took knowledge from anyone other than those who say iman is statements and actions, from Ahl-Sunnah. He also said, the statement we mentioned earlier, كتبت عن 1080 رجلا. I took knowledge, I wrote hadith from 1080 men. 1080 specifically. ليس فيهم إلا صاحب حديث. There was not any one other than a person of hadith among them. They were all scholars of hadith. كانوا يقولون, they were all saying, الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد وينقص. Iman is statements and actions, it increases and decreases. That's the first point Al-Imam Al-Bukhari makes. The second point, جاء عن بعض السلف, it is mentioned from some of the Salaf that they would say الإيمان قول وعمل واعتقاد. So some of the Salaf, they used to say Iman is belief, statement and action. 3 parts to it. But some of the Salaf used to say Iman is قول وعمل, just statements and actions. And some of them used to say that it's statements, actions and intention. And some of them used to say it is statements and actions and intention and following the Sunnah. 4 different ways that you'll find in the books of the Salaf. When reading into the books of the Salaf, you'll see 4 different ways that they used to explain this issue. Some of them simply statements and actions. That's Iman. Some of them statements and actions and belief. Some of them statements and actions and intention. And some of them statements and actions and intention and Sunnah. So then Shaykh al-Bukhari says, are these 4 different ways of explaining Iman, do they have a difference? Are they different to each other? Or are they somehow really all going back to the same point? Are they really different? Or are they really going back to the same point? Shaykh al-Bukhari says, لا فرق بينها يعني بين هذه التعبيرات, that there is no difference between these different phrases. كلها مأثورة عن سلف الأمة. All of those phrases are reported from the Salaf of the Ummah. وقد أبانها وكشف المراد من هذه العبارات شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah spoke about those 4 different ways that the Salaf used to talk about Iman. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah talked about it and explained what's going on. He said, إن من السلف من قال الإيمان قول وعمل كما هو نص عبارة الإمام الحميدي. هنا أراد قائل هذا القول قول القلب واللسان وعمل القلب واللسان. قلت فدخل فيه الاعتقاد. So Ibn Taymiyyah said, some of the Salaf said Iman is just statements and actions, like Al-Imam Al-Humaydi did at the beginning. And what they mean by that is statement of the heart and tongue, and action of the heart and tongue, which therefore means they are including belief of the heart. What they mean by statements and actions is statements of the heart and the limbs or the tongue, and actions of the heart and the limbs. So they are therefore including the heart in their definition. So that is clear. When they say it's only statements and actions, they are including statements and actions of the heart. That's in there. ومن أراد الاعتقاد قلت يعني التنصيص على لفظ الاعتقاد رأى أن لفظ القول لا يفهم منه إلا القول الظاهر. As for the ones who said statements and actions and belief specifically, that's because they considered that including belief within statements and actions of the heart may be confusing. That belief isn't a statement, it's just in the heart. And in your heart, it's not actions as such, it's to make it clear. They felt calling it under the banner of statements and actions isn't clear enough, so they would phrase it as statements, actions, and belief to make it explicit. That's all it was. قلت يعني لا يفهم منه القول القلبي أو خاف ذلك فزاد الاعتقاد بالقلب. قلت سبب الخوف أن لا يفهم منه ذلك فزاده فأراد أن يرفع ويدفع بأن ينصه على كلمة تزيل اللبس الذي قد يرد. So really the scholars who said it's statements and actions and belief, they added on and belief specifically, was only really to be explicit about it. So that nobody came along and said, okay, it's statements and actions, nothing to do with belief. To make it explicit and blatant, they added on into their phrase and i'tiqad, even though they knew as well that statements and actions included. So those scholars who added on belief were simply being explicit so that there was no possibility of any confusion. As for the ones who said statements and actions and intention, قال القول يتناول الاعتقاد وقول اللسان وأما العمل فقد لا يفهم منه النية فزاد ذلك. The ones who said statements and actions and intention, they said, okay, statements, they said, yeah, that can include obviously statements of the tongue, and they said it can include statements of the heart. That's okay. Statements, when you say Iman is statements, they say statements can include the heart and the tongue. And actions, then what is normally understood by that is the outward actions. And so a person may not include or become confused about the intentions behind those actions. So again, it was just to be explicit about the affair that yes, statements and actions that are based upon your intentions. Again, that is known, but to be explicit so nobody can make any point about anything. Then the final one was, the last one we'll mention today. The last statement was statements and actions and intentions and the Sunnah. They included the Sunnah. فَلِأَنَّ ذَلِكَ كُلَّهُ لَا يَكُونُ مَحْبُوبًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا بِاتِّبَاعِ السُّنَّةِ. And it's of course obvious that your statements, your actions, your belief, none of that will be valid unless it is upon, in accordance to the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not statements you're making outside of the Sunnah, not beliefs you have outside of the Sunnah, not actions that you do outside of the Sunnah. All of those things have to be upon the Sunnah for them to be beloved to Allah. وأولئك أي أصحاب القول الأول الذين قالوا قول وعمل لم يريدوا كل قول وعمل إنما أرادوا ما كان مشروعا من الأقوال والأعمال. قلت ولا يمكن أن تصف أمرا من قول أو فعل بأنه مشروع إلا إذا توفر فيه الإخلاص والاتباع، ولكن كان مقصودهم الرد على المرجئة الذين جعلوه قولا فقط فقالوا بل هو قول وعمل. So here the Shaykh is highlighting how obviously when the scholars said statements and actions, obviously they mean statements and actions that are upon the Sunnah. But again, this was to be more explicit and to be more blatant about the affair, that it is statements and actions and beliefs that are upon the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be more frank in their refutation of the Murji'ah and others, that we are upon the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Otherwise, in reality, as Shaykh al-Bukhari says, لا مغايرة بين هذه التعبيرات. There's no real difference between any of those phrases. All of them, in essence, come back to the same exact thing. Statements and actions and beliefs upon the Sunnah. Whether you just say statements and actions, it covers it all. Statements and actions and belief covers it all. Statements and actions and intention covers it all. Statements and actions and intention and Sunnah clearly covers it all. وكلها تصب فيما سبق ذكره وتقريره مما أجمع عليه السلف من أن الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد بالطاعة وينقص بالمعصية. So all of it goes back to what was mentioned. Its statements and actions and beliefs increases with obedience and decreases with disobedience. That is the second point. Al-Imam Al-Bukhari or Al-Shaykh Al-Bukhari, here we said, was mentioning some different points about Iman. They are the first 2 points he makes. The third point then, we'll maybe begin with that next time.